This is the Read to Lead podcast, episode 404.
Today, there's so many more meetings, and I think people are tired. We hear WebEx or Skype or Zoom fatigue. People are tired of screens and meetings.
Presenting to a group can be scary. The fear of public speaking is one of the biggest fears people have. However, imagine having to speak to a group and getting them to work with each other, collaborating to achieve a collective goal. Hi, I'm Jeff Brown, and I believe that if you desire to achieve true success in business and in life, then intentional and consistent reading is a must. That's why I created the Read to Lead podcast, the podcast dedicated to your personal and professional growth. Each week, I invite an author to come in and chat about their latest book and their unique insights on things like personal and professional development, leadership, productivity, career, business, marketing, sales, entrepreneurship, and much more. Today's topic is connected to the area of public speaking. In a moment, we'll sit down with Paul Maltby. He's author of The Fearless Facilitator, a proven plan for leading successful meetings, dynamic workshops, and effective training events. I'm going to be asking Paul to share about why mental resilience is key to becoming a fearless facilitator, ways to create a safe and welcoming environment for your attendees, his special process for dealing with questions to make sure they don't derail your event, and plenty more. This book has been especially useful to me in that I've been doing a lot more workshops and training events since my book came out in August. If you're seeking personal and professional development training for your team, I encourage you to reach out to me, Jeff at readtoleadpodcast.com. I've already had the chance to get in front of folks at LinkedIn and Disney and would welcome the opportunity to speak to your team. Again, Jeff at readtoleadpodcast.com to start the conversation. Paul Maltby is the professional development leader for IBM Consulting, covering Europe, the Middle East, and Africa. In his role, he and his team develop IBM's talent at all levels, ranging from associates to senior executives. Paul specializes in leadership development and is also part of the John Maxwell team. He's a conference speaker, facilitator, coach, and of course, author. His new book is called The Fearless Facilitator, a proven plan for leading successful meetings, dynamic workshops, and effective training events. I'm excited to have him. Paul, welcome to the Read to Lead podcast.
Jeff, I'm so excited to be here. I can't describe it. Thank you for having me.
Well, that's awesome. You know, in all my years doing this and the 20 plus years I've been what I consider to be an avid reader, I'm actually surprised I've never come across a book on this topic. As you were writing it, did you find that there were few written on this topic?
Yeah, do you know, if you look around, there are lots and lots of books on presentation skills, and there's a lot of focus on public speaking and being able to present. Facilitation, not so much. So yeah, there are a few out there. What's drawn to me was facilitation really wraps the whole thing up, not just being able to present, but also to be able to field questions, but also to get the audience or your group involved. So I was excited. This needs to be written, and so yeah, I was thrilled to be able to get it out there.
I couldn't agree more. I've read my share of public speaking books, probably 25 or more. But then with the release of, especially with my book 3 or 4 months ago, I'm finding myself in a place where I need to be really good at what your book teaches me to be really good at, because I'm doing more and more of those kinds of things all the time. So selfishly for me, it's come along at a perfect time.
Great.
Well, talk about your time as a management consultant and how you chose to address what was then a fear of public speaking.
Yeah, sure. I mean, I spent just to give you some context, I spent the first 10 years of my career in industry. I trained to be a chartered accountant and an analyst. So I dealt with a lot of numbers. So very rarely did I have to present. And if I did, it was almost on a one-to-one basis. So standing up in front of a group to present or to facilitate a workshop, I never had to do. So 10 years, the first 10 years, didn't have to do it. But then I joined a consultancy firm, and it's one of the big consultancies at the time down in London. So I moved from the sort of provinces here in the Midlands of the UK down to London to work for a big consultancy. So as an accountant, it couldn't get any better than that. But I had a real shock when they then started to ask me to present to clients, to run client workshops. And as an introvert, that doesn't come naturally to me. So that I felt, the nerves, they were very debilitating. I couldn't really function. Some people were telling me, you got to do a workshop next week. The whole weekend would just be written off because I was so scared of what might go wrong and how would they look at me like that? And is that my career over? So, it was a pivotal moment in my career. And what do I do? Do I stick with this? Because I've worked so hard, or I just go back to industry with the tail between my legs thinking, I failed. And I didn't want to do that. I'd worked so hard to get to where I was, years of study, lots of sacrifice. I've got to face this because if I move to another job, what's to say I'm going to have the same problem? So I decided to sort it out. And whether you call it divine intervention or not, within that moment, I had an email and it was asking for volunteers to be for internal training. And I thought, okay, that might be a safer way of practicing this skill of being in front of folks and presenting as well as facilitating, because it's an internal, more junior audience. And therefore less risky. They're not fee-paying clients or expecting perfection. So I did that. I volunteered to be an internal trainer, and the more I did it, the better I got. I knew I'd made it when one of my mentors and we delivered a course in Sweden. I'll never forget it. And he wanted me to be the lead. And he was like, really? And he was like, yeah, you got this. And I was like, well, I'm not really. He said, no, you got it. And I got the feedback from the students a few days later, and I actually scored higher than my mentor. And I thought, right, I've made it, I've done it, I can do this. So awesome. It was a real pivotal moment where I had to face my fears and the realization that if I didn't face them now, then what's to say that they'll just pop up in the next job.
You reminded me of a somewhat similar experience I had several years ago. I got my first chance to teach at the college level, something that I'd always wanted to do.
Right.
Classroom about 20 students. And I remember about a month or so after that first semester ended, and the dean sending me the feedback and just being pleasantly surprised at how overwhelmingly positive it was. And I was like, I can
do this.
I can do this. I can do this.
Yeah.
Well, of course, when you put together an event like this, training like this, a purpose is, high on the list. So, why are we here? What are some of the questions we need to ask of ourselves, and then maybe even two of clients to help determine, what is this for?
Yeah, there's a few questions, and I think they're even more important now because of the way we're working. We've been working virtually now since the early 2020. And I just said to my wife, this is the first time since 1996, I'm showing my age here, that I actually haven't traveled all year for work. Wow. 1996. Since then, every year I've traveled for work at some point. And this is phenomenal. And therefore, today there's been so many more meetings. And I think people are tired. You hear WebEx or Skype or Zoom fatigue. People are tired of screens and meetings. So first question, there's three questions I typically ask. First of all, is the event necessary? There are lots of other tools out there now virtually that can help avoid meetings. And meetings are expensive. They consume time. They bring people away from what they're supposed to be doing to be more productive. So, collaboration tools like Mural, where you don't all have to be in the room at the same time. You can actually keep adding and building on what other people have already contributed on the Mural. Trello is another, and all the tools are available, by the way, folks. But Trello is another tool that we sometimes use, which is tracking progress on tasks. To do in progress, done. So, rather than having a progress meeting, you just look at a Trello board, for instance. Group Slack, you can have instant messaging on Slack. And you can have group Slack where if you want to just ask a quick polling question, when's the best time to have a meeting next week? Pardon the irony there. Or it's just a very quick question just to gauge opinions. You can do that on a group Slack chat. So, is an event necessary? Or is it just a lazy excuse just to tie a whole bunch of people up for an hour? Second question, is everyone aligned on the purpose and outcome? You mentioned purpose, but is everyone starting from the same position?
Right.
When you're having a meeting, what are you there to achieve? There's no point brainstorming for options for a solution if some folks in the room are not really clear on the root cause of the problem. Because they'll go, well, hang on a minute, how do we know the solution's going to solve the problem? Because we don't know what's causing the problem. And also sometimes people may be closer to the subject matter than others. So you might have a 2-speed meeting, which therefore is not very effective. So is everyone aligned on the purpose and the outcome? What are we here to know? Why are we here? And what are we here to achieve? And then linked to that, how do we know we're done? How do we know we've got there? What's the agreement? What's the actions? Are we agreed on the actions? Are we agreed on who's going to do those actions and by when? So is the event necessary? Is everyone aligned on purpose and outcome? And then the final one is, who do you need at the meeting? And does everyone attending have a role? And do they understand how they're going to add value? In the book, I talk about there's one leader particularly I used to know who's, if their technical expert wasn't in the room, it's not worth having the meeting because the leader wasn't technical. So he would always ask his technical expert, what do you think? If he got a thumbs up, it was a go. If he got a thumbs down, it was a no-go. If the expert wasn't available, you'd reschedule the meeting. And it's the same with the influencers. Sometimes, you look at the stakeholder map or a hierarchy map, and you go, okay, we're definitely those. But hang on a minute. There may be some influencers who the people in the positions who've got the title and the badge, they may need the influencers. You may need them in the room to really get things moving. So are experts missing? Are influencers missing? Are there too many people in the room with too many opinions? And therefore you just go round and round in circles. So key thing there, who do you need at the meeting? Does everyone have a role? And do you understand what value they're going to add by being in the room? And don't be scared of stakeholder management and sending a note to those who are not invited saying, fear of missing out. You're not invited, but we are going to give you. It happens, isn't it? People, what are they talking about? But if you proactively manage those who are not invited, they either be grateful because they can do something else, but B, they'll know that they'll be informed, consulted on what actions or decisions have been made.
One interesting thing you bring up, and I'd be curious as to your thoughts on this. Why do you say mental resilience is key to becoming a fearless facilitator?
Yeah, it's a big one, isn't it? This one.
Yeah.
Now, how you think controls how you behave. The mind, if you think about it, is a powerful thing. It's amazing what we can get our bodies to do just by thinking. Whether we come out in a cold sweat, heart rate, goosebumps, our ability to sleep is all driven by what's going on in our heads. There's a lovely quote in the book that I've got, from Henry Ford. It says, if you believe you can or you can't, you're right. And that goes a long way, doesn't it? So the three things that I do around mental resilience are focus, mindset, and belief. And the first, and focus, let's start with focus. That was a huge breakthrough for me because I used to spend a lot of time worrying about nightmare scenarios. What am I going to do if this happens? What am I going to do if that happens? What if they don't like me? What if I forget what I'm going to say? And I used to get in such a state, but I realized the focus was on me. And I shifted the focus to what does my group need? What does the audience that I'm going to serve need? And how can I serve them? And as soon as I started to think more about what my audience or what my group needs or what my team needs, it was a lot easier. So shift the focus away from me and how am I going to look to more around my group and my team and what do they need. So focus was the first one. Mindset is the other one. I'm sure everyone's familiar with Carol Dweck's work on growth mindset. But also John Maxwell's book, which I love, is sometimes you win, sometimes you learn. And when you're presenting or facilitating, if you mess up, most of the time the group don't know. you know, but the group doesn't know. If you've missed a key message or if you're actually 5 minutes ahead or 5 minutes behind, so long as you're not too transparent, they don't know. So I realized that if I went wrong and no one really knows, then I would learn from that and take it forward And that's extra experience, extra learning for me. So mindset was a great thing as well. And then finally, belief. And a very short story. Many years ago, I did a presentation. It's in the book. And last minute, it was so basically a client-to-client presentation. So I wasn't supposed to be involved at all, but I helped my client write the presentation. And the very last minute, the client didn't show up and said, Paul, I had a note, Paul, you're on. What? I'd done no rehearsal because it wasn't supposed to be me, but I knew some of the presentations. But then he gave me a copy of the presentation, and some of the slides had changed, and I hadn't written the slides. And I looked at them and thought, one's with diagrams rather than words. And I was like, I'm not really sure what this diagram's trying to do.
No speaker notes.
No speaker notes. No nothing. So what I should have done, Jeff, was gone. Not my slides. I'm going to move on and just cover the ones I covered. I didn't. I bluffed. Now, I'm a consultant. Occasionally, we wing it. Let's be polite on the show. We wing it, and it showed. My eye contact dropped. My voice wobbled. I stuttered a little bit more. There's a few more ums in there and in there, and that's where the difficult questions came in. And the whole thing fell down like a house of cards. So the other mental resilience is having belief in you, having belief that you can cope, having belief in your messages. So that was the three things: the focus on your audience, growth mindset, believe that you can do this, and if you don't, then you're going to learn, and then belief. The thing is, ultimately, the mindset, you want to be able to step forward to be fearless rather than step back and be fearful. And that's in essence what the book's all about.
What are some examples of things that we can do as facilitators to help create a safe and welcoming environment for attendees so they can do their best work at the event?
Yeah, this is a tricky one because of the virtual world. So I'll try and cover a little bit of both. I'll start with a story on the face-to-face, but I'll then move to how that translates to virtual world, because I know a lot of us are working virtually now. But initially, the stories I had was it wasn't me, by the way. It was one of my colleagues. He went up to a client site where one of our teams was based. He got there early. He set up the room, put some posters on the wall. He had some music playing, some sticky notes on the tables with some paper pens, flip charts that had got stuff on them. And the partner, the leader, came in and went, "Wow, this is going to be some amazing training." And my colleague went, "How'd you know? You haven't seen it yet?" He said, "Yeah, but look at the room. This looks amazing." I feel that we're in safe hands here. Because the way that you're taking care of the room shows that you're taking care of the training, and therefore you value us because you've gone to all this trouble.
That's cool.
Now, how does that translate to virtual? One of the things we do is that the room almost becomes the mural. We use lots of murals, and that's sort of pre-populated, not totally, but there's a lot of color in there. There's some pictures in there, some drag and drop pictures and photos. We have a gallery so that we invite people to come in and write against their picture and what are they interested in. Something personal that's not too personal, but it's not about work. So people come in and there are things to look at, things to see, and things that they can do. And we always get in early. We don't start on the hour with business and transactions. We start with relations and just to try and land with people to make them feel safe, feel comfortable. You're in the right place. We're here for you, not the other way around, and we're here to serve you. And I'm interested in how to do that. So that's one thing around that. The other thing is just to get everyone involved. The sooner you can get people involved, the more they feel that they've got a part in it, that they should be therefore willing to take part and wanting to contribute. And coupled with that, so one thing that we often do is we ask them a very simple question, like, what are your hopes and fears of the event? Assuming it's a larger workshop. And it's a simple question, but we said just reflect on it individually, and then we're going to pair you up. So in virtual, we can create very simple breakout rooms. So they think about it individually. They then pair up and voice and vocalize their opinions and test it out, make sure it doesn't sound ridiculous. And then we bring everybody back and we say, so what did you come up with? And then people feel free to speak up. So nobody feels like they're on the spot, but everybody feels that they have the opportunity to contribute.
Right.
And that's something that is really important. You do it early because that sets the tone.
Well, related to that, I'd be curious to have you describe some of the ways you talk about in the book of working the room to not only engage with attendees yourself, but to get them to engage with each other and then maintain that throughout the entirety of the event.
Yeah, there's a couple of things. So the main thing in 2 words is common ground. How quickly can you find common ground between people? Ideally beyond work. And there's a lovely exercise that we do, 2 ways that we do that. Very often we just say, so, what's your passion? What's been your highlight this year? And both of those questions can go either way, work or personal. So interesting questions there. What's your passion? What's been your highlight this year? Some people, they don't feel safe enough to disclose personal stuff. We'll talk about work stuff. But ideally, it's something that they're passionate about or it's a highlight. So it's positive. Others may go personal and you'll find all sorts of stuff out. So talk about something that is positive. And then once you've learned stuff about them, you can then repeat with others and then try and connect the dots. We do this sometimes quite formally in an activity where we put them in trios. And we say, okay, find out something that you've got in common with at least one other person. So person A to person B might have something in common. Person B and person C might have something in common, for instance. And then we say, find something that you all got in common. And then present that back to the wider group. And therefore, yes, the trios have some sort of common ground, but then by presenting it back to the other trios in the wider group, different people might find out different things in other. So rather than relying on just their 3 group, they can start to have connections. And there was a lovely example a couple of years ago where we had this, and there were two ladies in a group of 20 people in different groups, different trios. Both had discovered that they were going to Machu Picchu in Peru at the same time, but on different expeditions. They were so excited. They were almost giddy, and they were just, oh my God, we're going to see each other in Peru. When are you going? And when are you going to get to this? When you get to, they were so excited, but they had a legitimate excuse, and that's a key word there, legitimate excuse to go and talk to somebody else beyond their group that they didn't know before the course. To really get to know each other. And that happens all the time, not just with personal stuff, but also with work stuff.
That's cool. I remember reading that story in the book. It gave me chills when I read that.
Yeah.
It's like, wow, that's really cool.
Yeah.
Well, what does an expert facilitator need to understand about context in order to meet the needs of the attendees they're addressing?
Yeah, context is key. And I'm quite bouncy and quite bubbly when I'm facilitating, but you don't want to be bouncing into the room, full of energy and enthusiasm when the organization has just announced layoffs. And you go, yeah, we're here for a training course, or yeah, we're here to work out the transformation of the organization. They'll go, most of us are out of a job, Paul. Woohoo, So, you've got to judge the appropriate behavior, and you can't do that unless you understand context. So, what's going on in the organization, and maybe even the industry generally. If you're certainly in the UK at the moment and you're in the hospitality industry and lockdown is looming because of the new variant of COVID, there may be some pretty sad people in there because they're struggling to understand their future. So what's going on in the industry as well? What's happened before the event? Now, have there been previous meetings that took place on the topic that you've been brought in to help with that failed? Very often people try and do things themselves and get stuck. And we need an independent facilitator here to really get this going. So, what happened before? Have they tried this before and it failed? Are there challenging relationships in the room which have got completely polar opposite opinions? So how are you going to deal with those? And added to that, are there some really tricky, controversial or sensitive topics that, if mentioned, will just ignite the room? And it's very difficult to then bring it back because you've just lit the fuse, and the whole group has exploded into anger or annoyance or irritation. So I think so. Just understanding where the group is and what's going on really then helps you understand and appreciate and maybe empathize with the group, but also that might inform the design, how you're going to approach this particular scenario. So, if you've got a lot of people who don't get on and you stick them in the same breakout room, that could be a bit of a problem, for instance. So I think context is helpful. And I think the more attention you pay to context, the better prepared you are in how you design the event up, but also then how you facilitate it as well.
Well, we've covered much of part 1 of the book through the questions that I've asked so far. Part 1 is called The Iceberg, and we've gotten into chapters like purpose and resilience and environment, engagement. There's also venue, needs, team. Part 2 is what I want to get into now. You have a special process for dealing with questions to make sure that they don't, as they often do, derail your event. Can you unpack a bit of that process?
Yeah, sure. I mean, first of all, facilitator, celebrate this fact, Jeff. As a facilitator, you shouldn't really have to answer any questions. Presenters get a tough time because they're the expert. Yeah. Therefore, they should be getting these questions. As a facilitator, you should relax and bask in the knowledge that you should not have to answer any tough questions. So again, for those people who are feeling a bit nervous, that might be a game changer for them. Thinking, okay. So you want to make the group more resourceful on answering their questions. And the whole of section 2, as you say, is devoted to that. And there are several techniques, and they spell SHIELD. And it's basically from a friend of mine called Justin Douglas. I'm going to give him credit there because he always provides a physical shield. I'm not kidding you, a physical shield to defend against difficult questions. So the first thing is specify. When you get a difficult question, or any question for that matter, specify. Sometimes questions are vague. So how do you handle poor performance, Paul? What do they mean by poor performance? Are we talking the company? Are we talking the department? Are we talking an individual's performance? Profitability? What are we talking about? I have no idea. So get the questioner to be more specific. That buys you a bit of time at least. And even going beyond that, if you're still not sure, ask for an example. That will really start to bring the context of the question into focus. So once you've got that and everybody's now clear on the question, great, hand it back to the questioner. If they care enough to ask the question in the first place, you'd like to think they have an opinion on it. So pass it back. Give them the first opportunity to ask the question. Now, the added bonus to this, Jeff, the added bonus, if people know that when they ask a question, it's going to come back to them, no one will dare ask a difficult question. It's the truth. And if they do, they know what's coming. Very often people ask these questions very early on and they soon learn that, okay, I'm going to get the question back. Okay. So hand the question back to the questioner. Once you've done that, involve others. So, Tom has said this. What does everybody else think? Because Tom might be an island on a crusade and everyone else thinking, oh, here we go. Tom's off on his crusade again. And everyone else might say, yeah, we don't care, Paul, move on. Okay, that's good data. Or they might go, yeah, we agree with Tom. This is really important. Okay, that's really helpful. Let's explore. And that then links into the next one, which is evolve the question. Very often you might get a topic or a question that comes up and all of a sudden the whole group gets super excited. And then just evolve the question. And I won't go into the details here, buy the book, but there's a structured way of then running that discussion through, framing the discussion. What's the scope, getting down to the learning, and there's a structured way of doing that. So, but evolve the question into a discussion so that everyone feels heard, everyone feels they've contributed, but ultimately at the end of that discussion, there's an outcome, which is the mnemonic is talks. So the S in talks is summarize. What's the learning? What's the so what? My favorite question in consulting is always, so what? You've given me this, so what? Right. So we've talked about specify, hand back, involve others, evolve the question into a discussion. And then the L is look. look at a different perspective. So if the group's stuck for an answer, maybe the question is asked, and a great example, many years ago as a project manager, when I kicked off a project, I used to say to the client, so I'm interested in what do you think we could do to make this project a success? And the clients were like, well, you're the expensive consultant, you tell me. You go, okay, it's not quite the input I was looking for, but we'll go with it. So I used to look at it from a different perspective and go, okay, what could we do to really screw this project up?
And they've got all kind of answers for that, don't they?
I couldn't shut them up, Jeff. I just couldn't shut them up. Everyone had got an opinion because they'd all been burnt on some of the previous project. So we found out all the things we could do to screw the project up, and we then just reversed it. So if we didn't do all of that, would that be helpful? And they went, yeah, brilliant. And they were all on board. So, but also, if you're stuck in the current problem, what's the ideal vision of the future? Paint me a picture, and they paint you, and then you work backwards. So if people are stuck, look at it a different way. But if that's all too difficult, maybe the right people are not in the room. Maybe the question's above the pay grade of the people in the room. Maybe the expert's not in the room, or maybe the information's not available at that time. Leave it. Park it. Maybe there are only 2 or 3 people in the room that are really passionate about it. The other 90% don't care. All right, leave it till the end. Let's see if those 3 people who really care are still there. If they're not, then don't worry about it. And so that's look or leave, and then finally distract. If a question doesn't seem relevant or important to the group, or it's getting bogged down, maybe suggest a break. Anyone fancy a break? Oh yeah, let's have a break. Distract them with a break. Distract them with something new, something different. Move on, just move a slide on, or pop another question in text chat or something. Or something else we do in the social contract, one of my favorites, is use Elmo. Enough. Let's move on. And if you put that into the social contract, anyone can shout Elmo. So if we're really getting bogged down and you go, do you know, does it feel like an Elmo moment to you? Yes, it does feel like an Elmo moment. Let's move on. Okay, great. So enough, let's move on. So that's the D, distract. So shield, specify, hand back, involve others, evolve the question into a discussion, look at it a different way, or leave it till later, and then distract.
Excellent.
If you've got all of those, Jeff, you are bulletproof in defending yourself against any tough questions.
I love it. I've got a couple of questions I want to ask you, Paul, not directly related to your book. But before I do that, I always want to ask if there's anything else that I've not covered that you want to make sure you have a chance to talk about.
We alluded to it earlier, I think, Jeff. As I say, presenting and public speaking can be scary enough, but the audience is largely passive until it comes to Q&A.
Right.
And then you're the expert, so you largely get away with whatever answer you give them. Facilitation, you're still in front of folks, and you've got a huge responsibility for driving a group of very busy, very talented professionals through a process to achieve an outcome. You're not quite sure how they're going to work together. So, getting the group to work together, building the relationship, building the engagement, managing the time, avoiding those derailments. There's a lot going on. And a lot of leaders tend to overlook this skill. And I think as a leader, there's huge value in being able to lead your people through a process where people feel safe, they feel heard, they feel valued, and are actively engaged. I think a leader is almost a catalyst of transformation from getting a group from A to B, from problem to solution, from options to a decision. So I think if you're a leader and you've not really paid attention, as you said earlier, lots of books on presentation skills, not so many on facilitation. I think there's huge value in today's society, in a world of experts, to be an expert on process, not just content.
Well, over the course of your career, Paul, I'd be curious to know what some of the more impactful books you've read have been. Anything that stand out as something you recommend to a lot of other people?
Yeah, for me, the life-changing moment for me was a book by Stephen Guise on mini habits. I think you've talked about atomic habits and micro habits, but the book I read was Mini Habits by Stephen Guise. And it's not a big book, but so it doesn't take too long to read. I've been buying books for years, And a lot of the time they were on the shelf. And I used to say, this time of year, my New Year's resolution is I'm going to read a book a month, starting tomorrow. And tomorrow never came. But I read Mini Habits, and they say, make it 2 pages a day. And it's in your book. I've read it in your book. I saw that and I thought, great, Jeff's got this one. Brilliant. And so, you don't have to buy Stephen's book. You just buy Jeff's book. It's in there as well. But it's the same thing. Just read 2 pages a day. But if you've then found time to read 2 pages, you might end up reading 4, 6, 10, 20 pages. And that's very often what happened to me. I just found a time where I could consistently read 2 pages, but the book I usually pick were books I bought before that are interested in. So I ended up reading more than a book a month in the end because I broke it down into bite-sized chunks.
Dr. B.J. Fogg talks about a similar concept in his book, Tiny Habits.
Tiny Habits, that's right, yeah.
He adds the element of celebration. So after you've accomplished your tiny goal, make sure that you acknowledge having done so with some sort of celebration to kind of train the brain over time that this is something that we like. We want to do this again, kind of a thing.
Yeah. My friend Perry Holly, another author, put me onto this book, and the way he described it was, if you read 2 pages a day, that's your goal. Beyond that, bonus pages.
That's right. Bonus pages.
You've exceeded the goal. How good does that feel? So respect to Perry for that one. The other one I regularly go back to is the Outward Mindset by the Arbinger Institute. So that's so the institute themselves. There's not a attributed author to that, but the Outward Mindset is how we see others. We see them as people, but we see them as objects. And as a leader, you'd be amazed at the power of seeing a person as a person rather than an object. And very often we as leaders deceive ourselves in the way that we behave because of how we see others. It's a phenomenal read if you haven't checked it out. So I regularly recommend that because mindset affects behavior. How I see you will affect how I behave towards you. How I behave towards you will shape the quality of our relationship. The quality of our relationship will shape how we work together and how we perform in the business. And so people go, mindset's all very soft. No, yeah, but it's hard to do some of these soft stuff. And if you go right back to mindset, you can't change behavior unless you change the mindset. So I really recommend the Outward Mindset by Arbinger. And then the final one, I'm a John Maxwell fan, so I couldn't not include a John Maxwell book. Everyone communicates, few connect. As a facilitator, my role is to connect with the people I facilitate, but more importantly, to help my group connect with each other. And so all the stuff he covers in that book is hugely valuable if you're a facilitator.
Paul, I know you were talking about habits a moment ago. I know you're familiar with my work on dream, dance with discomfort, ritualize reading, examine your energy, assemble your advisors, master your mornings, these 5 personal habits that I believe supercharge your life. We don't have time to talk about all of them, but I'm wondering which of those 5 would you say is your favorite and that you look forward to practicing the most?
Favorite? Wow. I think we'll start with the first one. Dance with discomfort. I'm used to presenting to people or working with people in a small group. I sometimes do big groups, but putting myself on a podcast with Jeff Brown, having seen who you've had before, he's like, oh my God, am I worthy? But again, I have to go past the me and focusing on me and go, well, who could I help by coming onto this podcast? How many other people could I reach? And have I said something today that would resonate with someone else and going, oh, brilliant, that's really going to help me. So dance with discomfort. And I think that's my favorite one because it really forces you to think about, well, what could I do to grow? Because growth and comfort, isn't connected. You have to get out of your comfort zone to grow. And if I'm not growing, I'm not learning, then I'm not happy because that's who I am. I love to learn.
Well, Paul's book, again, is called The Fearless Facilitator, a proven plan for leading successful meetings, dynamic workshops, and effective training events. If anything like that's in your future, I highly recommend this book. I think it's the perfect field guide for anyone wanting to get better at that skill. Paul, thank you so much for coming on the show and helping us understand what you do so much better.
Jeff, it's been my pleasure. Thank you for having me, and thanks for the opportunity.
You know, I really can't recommend this book highly enough, especially if you're looking to lead more successful meetings, dynamic workshops, and effective training events, as the subtitle of the book says. It's helped me tremendously. I think it can help you too. I'll put a link to the book in the show notes page for today's episode, along with those other books and resources that Paul mentioned. You can find everything at readtoleadpodcast.com/404 for episode 404. I'm now offering my own dynamic workshops and effective training events centered around personal and professional development, reading habits, reading retention, comprehension, and more. And I'd love to address your team. If I can help, reach out at jeff@readtoleadpodcast.com. That's jeff@readtoleadpodcast.com. Finally, I want to say a special happy birthday to my wife, who turned 40-something, we'll say, yesterday on the 3rd of January. Happy birthday, Annie. We also got some snow on the ground where we live. She absolutely loves snow, so I don't think there could have been a better birthday present than to wake up with that on the ground. Love you, honey. Next week's episode just coincidentally happens to fall on my birthday, and we'll welcome Elizabeth Knox to the conversation. She's written a book called Work Reimagined that I think you're really going to like. That's next time on the Read to Lead podcast. Until then, as always, remember, leaders read and readers lead.